to get to Matthew chapter 24 because I find this to be hugely, hugely important. And let me describe, if I could, a couple of different views that people have of what we would consider as the end times. And so if you're familiar with this ministry, you already know where I'm at on this. I believe in a literal view of the book of Revelation. I believe that everything that is basically after the third chapter is looking forward to what John saw. Even in chapter 4, it's all the preparation for what ends up happening beginning at chapter 6, which is the tribulation here on the earth. And the chapters 4 and 5 is what John sees in the throne room of God. So that's what he's able to see and what is presented to him. By chapter 6, Jesus is opening the seals of the scroll that's handed to him in chapter 5. So that's all looking forward, and I take a very, very literal view of those things. So as a result of that, it also is going to influence massively how I look at much of the Bible, that if I see something spoken of with a lot of specifics, I don't want to try to find something in history to make it fit if it doesn't fit entirely. So unfortunately, many will do exactly that. Because they're predisposed to believing one particular thing, then they'll play kind of fast and loose with the details of other passages that might seem contradictory to their view. And what we have here in Matthew 24 is one particular group within what is known, or what some people would call kingdom now theology, buy into this. And I've heard some say these kind of things. But let me deal with what some refer to as kingdom now, though they're insanely different. Kingdom now can sometimes get lumped in with what we also call dominion theology. And dominion theology and kingdom now I don't put in the same category, because I'd rather be able to keep them separate, though they all have the same end result, things that they want to see take place. The pure dominionist believes that, and there are variations within this, but the dominionists would believe that in the last days that God's going to endow a particular segment within the church with supernatural power that hasn't been seen since the days of the apostles, and this will even be greater than that. Popularized by guys like C. Peter Wagner and John Wimber and others like him. But there are a whole number of other ones that were not really kind of tied in with them initially. Kansas City Prophets, those kind of guys. Mike Bickle, you've heard of him. Fell into all kinds of problems with the church there in Kansas City. But there are variations, again, within that group of people. But Bickle's the one that kind of comes to mind, that he's of that group within dominionism that believes that the church is to go through the entirety of the tribulation, but they don't go in it as potential victims. They don't go into it as anybody who could potentially be withstood or defeated. They see themselves as the conquering bride who will go through the tribulation conquering and then deliver the kingdom over to Jesus at his return in chapter 19. And it is, man, talk about some ridiculous views of the book of Revelation to get to that point. It is fascinatingly weird. But they still see it as future. They just see the church's role in ways, the things that they have to read into the text they're not fascinating. They're disturbing that somebody could do that much violence to the text. There's a whole different group of people that I would call the kingdom now people, who believe that they're really perfecting the world now by the things that they do. And once they've done that, and once they've completed the task that they're supposed to do, then it's made ready for the person of Jesus to come and take the earth. And so they figure that the kingdom now is that they have to be busy doing things in the world. So I put the Dominionists, also known as the New Apostolic Reformation, the hyper-charismatic, they're all kind of intertwined. Those different groups are all the same people doing the same things. And again, there are some variations about how much they have to deal with the tribulation if they believe that it's literal. But for the most part, they do. If they've ever taken the time to look through it, they probably are going to side with kind of Bickle's view of the whole thing. The church goes through the tribulation, the conquering bride who delivers the kingdom to Jesus at the end of the tribulation. That's those guys. Others that are in the kingdom now, and though he's not as much on on the landscape as he used to be. Rick Warren was one of those guys that I would think is kind of textbook kingdom now, because he was so busy doing all kinds of things around the earth. And people like him were doing the same kind of things. And they pointed to one particular verse that I've heard a number of them use. And you would say, well, why are you doing those things in the earth? Why are you so busy doing everything around the world? And they're saying, well, this is our mission field, because really we're doing what Jesus talked about in Matthew 24. And they point to verse 14, where it says, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached to all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. So they're saying Jesus won't be able to come until this gospel is preached to all the nations. And so we're going to all the nations, and we're building houses and, making sandwiches and giving blankets and clean water and all that stuff. And so we're doing all of those things, and that's the way of making sure that the gospel gets out. Usually it's the gospel more in action than it is in message. And that's kind of the problem, because if you're never getting to the heart of the matter, which is the spiritual deadness of the people, I don't care what you do for them in this earth, whether you build them a house and give them water and blankets and food and all that stuff and sustain them in the physical sense, if you haven't taught them the genuine gospel, and if you don't leave from that place with them being born again, you're not even fulfilling the verse that you say you're fulfilling. So this gospel. Unfortunately, what they have that view, unlike the weirdness of the Dominionists, they have the view, many of them, if not most, have the view that really all those things that you would see in Revelation have already taken place. So these are the people that are in the preterist camp when it comes to the book of Revelation. It's already taken place, and all of the things said in there are not literal, because they were really fulfilled in history, and that would be the sacking of Jerusalem and of Israel, the conquering of them thoroughly, displacing them by Rome in 70 A.D. So it's not a literal 1,000 years as we believe, it's a figurative one, and so it's an indefinite amount of time. So we've ultimately been in the, quote, millennium, not literal, since that time, 70 A.D., and we're just waiting for the return of Jesus. But the church has a responsibility to preach this gospel to all the nations, and then the end will come. So they're motivated to do all of their works elsewhere in the world and getting this gospel out there. But interestingly enough, the context of Matthew 24 is absolutely not anywhere near what they're thinking that it is, because Jesus is giving them an understanding of what the world will be like before his return. Here they're thinking that they are preparing the world for him, and whether it's the Dominionists who have been beating that drum really in high gear since the mid-70s, but long before that. I mean, there was the idea of the latter rain movement, the Manifest Sons of God, Joel's Army, those different groups from the 70s and into the 60s, all the way back to Branham in the 40s of last century, who thought that there was this great awakening happening in the spiritual sense, and they were bringing revival and all that nonsense. It's been going on for decade after decade after decade, and they're losing ground. When I look at guys like Rick Warren and the people who believe in the kingdom now side of this, that we're going to go into the world and we're going to do all of our works and we're going to do this, that, and the other thing, and we're going to bring the world into a place where it's supposed to be, and then Jesus can return. There too, I would look at them and say, how are you doing with this? Is the church really in either one of those two camps on the advance? Are they taking back ground, or are they losing ground? And I don't think it takes much imagination to realize that they're both failing miserably, because they have a completely wrong view of what the world will look like, what the church's role should be in it, and this idea of the end coming. If you're reading what Jesus talks about here in Matthew 24, he's speaking of a time future to this. And we would call it the tribulation that happens when, and different people view this different ways. Is it the rapture of the church that starts it? Does it happen before that? And then you have the time of tribulation that happens, that 70th week of Daniel. There are different views of that whole thing. I don't have to even worry about getting into them right now because we don't need to deal with it. What we can look at here in chapter 24 is that Jesus is clearly talking about that 70th week of Daniel, that time of tribulation. So what are some of those hallmarks that we get of that? In chapter 24, we get it in verse 5 or verse 4. It says, "Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying that I am the Christ, and will deceive many." So the idea of false Christs rising is the first thing, and he warns of deception. So when you start to read through these, many will come in my name, and then verse 6, you're going to hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, and the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilence, earthquakes in various places. All of these are just the beginnings of sorrows. And so those have all happened throughout history, but it gives the impression that there's a time coming when those things will be more prevalent. The idea of natural phenomenon than ever before, and that will be a great understanding that you're getting close to that time. When we're in the time of the tribulation that you read about in Revelation, you can see that there is a lot of earthly and terrestrial and celestial phenomena that takes place that's pretty much without precedent. So in verse 9 it says, "Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you. You will be hated by all the nations for my name's sake, and many will be offended and betray one another, and they will hate one another. Many false prophets will rise up and deceive many, and because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold, but he who endures to the end will be saved." And that's basically the same thing that he says to the churches in Revelation 3. So that time that we're getting to the end of it. Now, the gospel that's mentioned here, this gospel, does it mean that we're only looking at, there hasn't been much, quote, gospel in the first parts of this because it's all bad news. So the gospel is good news, and that would mean more all of the gospel as he has presented to them and has been presented through the ages since he spoke these things. The good news is man's reconciliation to God through the shed blood of Jesus Christ, the forgiveness of sins, and that man can be reconciled to God. That's the gospel. That's the good news, and everything that entails, the entire message behind it. That whole thing is going to be said to the entirety of the world before the end comes. So does that mean, when will that actually happen, that the end actually takes place? And that doesn't happen until the end of the tribulation. Will the gospel be being preached? Of course it is. Read Revelation. You have the 144,000 Jewish men who are sent out. You have the gospel that's being preached by the angels. You have the witnesses that are there. That will all be done during the tribulation and really hit its high gear in the second half as you read through Revelation. So that will still be going on, which means that this doesn't happen before that time, but during and to the end of that time that this message will go out, and the gospel can be accepted and received by anyone at any time. And the only ones that would be precluded from that in the tribulation are those who have voluntarily taken the mark of the beast. They've pledged their allegiance to him. So when we read, this verse 24, this isn't a verse or verse 14 in chapter 24, and there's a lot more to the chapter as well. Jesus goes on and gives great detail about the second half in particular, the great tribulation such as the world's never seen. That's the revealing of the Antichrist. He's saying here that stuff's going to be going on before he's revealed. This earlier part of the chapter is how bad it will be at the front end of it, but there's a lot more that's going to take place that will be much more desperate than even that. So for these people to say, well, we're preaching this gospel so that the end could come, they're not even going to look at a literal rest of the book of Revelation as being future. They believe that it's already taken place. They're just waiting until they've done whatever they're supposed to do that meets the criteria of verse 14, that the gospel's preached and now the end can come. So this idea of kingdom now theology, again, don't lump it in to be all the same thing. When I look at the New Apostolic Reformation, the apostles and prophets that are mentioned there, the church that thinks that they're going to be, walking through the tribulation, destroying the work of Satan and delivering the kingdom back to Jesus because they've conquered, that's one group of people, and they don't look at this the exact same way as the the people that are involved in the missions, and they're believing that all that stuff in Revelation has already taken place. We're not awaiting any of that stuff. It's not future. So you have different views about, when you look at Revelation, is it still going to happen, or did it already take place? And in those people that sometimes, or in that group, those groups where sometimes people lump them in together as being kingdom now, they have such a different view of what is still future to this world. But this idea that they, by their actions, are going to go out and preach this, quote, gospel, whatever they think that it is, to the whole earth, and then the earth, then the end will come. They're just waiting for Jesus to come back. That's the one part of Revelation that they might believe, but they see their role in it is that they must do these things in order that he can. And again, there are variations in all of these views within those camps, but here, as I look at this, I disagree strongly with both of them. I believe that what Jesus describes here is the run-up to the tribulation, the false Christs and all the rest of it. And then into the tribulation, it hits its high gear when the abomination of desolation takes place. And the man of sin is put there, and he's worshipped in the temple of God during that time. I don't think that's ever happened in history. The people who try to say that that happened with Nero, that it happened in 70 AD and other times, my goodness, you have to do such gymnastics to make that fit historically. And so much of what is described in Revelation it's never fulfilled in any of those things that happened in 70 AD, let alone that. Even one last thing along those lines, if everything that is being spoken about in Revelation was only speaking to the events in Jerusalem when Rome sacked it and then ultimately dispersed Israel, then there's no reason for him to tell the church at Philadelphia, which is modern day Turkey, 1,000 plus miles away, that they would be kept from the tribulation that is going to come upon the whole earth, that's described within a couple of chapters of that time. So if it's only Jerusalem, you don't need to warn a church in Turkey. It's not going to affect them. They're already in the Roman Empire. This is happening to them in Jerusalem because they're Jewish, and because there was rebellion, that as they saw it there among the people. So the whole thing, just again, it doesn't fit. It doesn't work when we look at the text if we take it in the literal sense. So I wanted to address that idea of kingdom now and Matthew chapter 24 verse 14, and just under simple examination of the text and the context of the text, it completely dismisses the idea of the amillennial view and of the kingdom now view of verse 14. So just thought it would be a good one to put out there. And for more information on that, there's a lot to it. I've worked on other parts of this topic in times past. If you're interested in those, contact me through the ministry's website, which is oldpaththeology.net, and I'll be happy to discuss any of those things with you.